Hi, I'm Grace Lynch. Welcome to another video of Wilderness Chronicles. I want to read this little disclaimer. The concepts and methods presented here are my own original work, unless otherwise cited. I'm not a licensed professional in any capacity. These are simply the tools I developed and used to navigate my own life and circumstances. Any meaning, value, or application this work holds for you is entirely yours to determine. So this video is called The End of Context, and these are a set of videos that are it's laying a foundation to be able to explore the needs and function of complex meaning. And eventually, this will be a stepping off point into non-contextual trauma work, neurodivergent 12-step recovery, my own model, which I had to make for myself, self-recovery, context addiction, identity work, boundary work, all sorts of things. The first half of memory integration. Anyway, so there's certain pieces that need to be put into place because it's a different way of thinking. And the reason for the different way of thinking, I don't do it lightly. It's very difficult. But the reason I did it was to deal with the practical situation that I was facing. When I was reintegrating after brain rehab, once, as I covered in the last video, I had a choice between either accepting that meaning only followed from understanding, in which case the entire 27 years from my fall until when things snapped back into place, my entire adult life, including the birth of my children, including graduating from college twice, my divorce, like practically everything that made me, all the years of mental health misdiagnosis, the rounds of electricity run through my skull, going out on the streets, all these different things, domestic violence, and you know, anyway, thing after thing. All of that would be meaningless because I experienced it in a languageless state through my sort of holographic synesthetic autism. Cross-modal awareness that developed after my aphasic experience. Or that had meaning, but it was a kind of meaning that was irreconcilable with the premise that meaning follows from understanding. The only way that I could make sense of that, as I had stated, was to use the same kind of thinking that in the history of our world civilization, it took centuries after the creation of the integers to create the concept, the number zero. It wasn't that we couldn't create a concept of nothing. It was that to make it a mathematical concept, it has to work the same way for everyone, or it's not an invariant, so it can't be used interchangeably for people with different perspectives. One of the sticking points I found when I was younger is it bugged me that we couldn't divide by zero. When I got much older and into college, I learned that actually we can divide by zero, but we can't make it mathematics because we don't have a way to define it so that it works the same way for everybody. There's no logical reason to show why 3 divided by 0 equals 7 is more correct than 3 divided by 0 equals next Tuesday or strawberry ice cream or whatever. And because we don't have a reasonable way to make it the same and hold that as a kind of conceptualization, a functional conceptualization, we can't make mathematics out of dividing by 0. But there's other aspects of 0 that work really well as a number. But the problem is that it doesn't actually count anything. There's no way to unify the number of times a thing is not there. We can't use 0 as a counter. And so up until that point, my understanding of the history of mathematics, and I only got an undergraduate degree in mathematics. I didn't do graduate. I didn't become one of the smart people, the professor people. I just got a reasonable undergraduate education in it, and I got a pretty strong one. I have 18 math courses, and 15 of them were upper division, and I did very, very, very well. Got scholarships. I got a fellowship. Anyway, so up until that time, integers were the only kind of number. In order to bring 0 in as a number, we couldn't make it fit into what numbers had been we had to expand what number could be. I took that thinking and applied it to my situation because I didn't have anything else. And so I decided, well, why don't I expand what meaning can be? I'm not saying that personal meaning is the same as contextual meaning. I'm saying that I can declare for myself that it is a kind of meaning, placeholder kind of meaning, and add the two together without merging them the same way that you would add complex numbers together. Real component and an imaginary component, where imaginary is the square root of -1. I would call it imaginal meaning, a personal, perspective, safety-based, body-based meaning, but that has just as much impact on individual consciousness as the social and collective, if not more so. So it began to evolve into the idea of a perspective-based meaning. Well, like a set of dominoes, this began kicking things over that no longer worked in terms of a contemporary understanding of language or meaning. The problem came about is that once perspective was part of the meaning of a word, once the experience of being a person, understanding the word became part of the meaning of the word, when I learn what an apple is, when I eat an apple, then the meaning of apple for me has grown to include the experience that I have. It becomes part of the information for me. And so if I look moment to moment, as what the meaning of a word is as a box of things, then if I go to the next moment where I've done some kind of interaction with the word, and that has a box of things that is the meaning of that word, I ask myself the question, is the box at time one of meanings identical, absolutely identical, to the box that is the meaning of the word at time t equals 0? It's always a yes or no question. In mathematics, it's a yes or no question. They're identical or they're not. Well, once I stipulate that personal meaning is part of the meaning of the word, and that the meaning of the word changes and grows because the person is integrated with the process of meaning building, then suddenly there is no such thing as continuous meaning. So there's not a single, when I looked at what the world was offering me in recovering from my aphasia, I wanted to get back the box of words that was the same, stayed the same over time. The world seemed to operate as if language is a box of words whose meaning stays constant. When I looked for the collection of words that satisfy that property, I could not find a single word in the entire history of my life or human civilization that I believed credibly could have stayed constant over the course of human history or even my lifetime. I realized that the number of words that make up a persistent language, a persistent meaning system, is actually the empty set. There's no language at all that fits that quality. Therefore, everything that's based on that kind of thinking is a false premise. And you can reason lots of things with false premises and you will get valid conclusions. You just won't get sound conclusions. I didn't like this. I wasn't happy about it. Why are my glasses so crooked? Oh, it's because they're like that. So I didn't like this at all. I was deeply disturbed. I wanted to get back to meaning as I had known it. Nobody could have been more unhappy than I was, but it was logically forced. Once I stipulated that personal experience had meaning all of its own, and that the experience of being a person was part of the meaning being built, then persistent meaning had never been true in the history of the universe anyway. No such thing as abstract meaning. The entire objective scaffolding of intellectual achievement was gone. It was not supportable. It was valid, but it wasn't sound. And for me as a person, my safety in reestablishing my consciousness required soundness, not validity, not mere validity. Anybody can tell a story about what's true, but if you need what's true to be the bridge that you yourself are going to walk across a chasm where the consequence if it fails is death, then for myself, I was highly motivated to not settle for a nice story. there were some other consequences too to making perspective-based meaning. Once there was perspective that was part of the meaning, and perspective was based on personal safety is unique, then it became glaringly obvious that no two people could have the same meaning at all. No two people could ever agree on meaning. Therefore, there was no agreed language system. There was a story about it that was really sexy and appealing, and it gave a feeling of control, which was an illusion, but if you could get away with it and get people to pay you for it, cool. You know, you get a retirement program. It doesn't make it real or sound, but it makes it so that you can get away with it. Another consequence was that there was no such thing as the repeated experience. That was deeply disturbing to me. Once somebody had a framework, the scaffolding that they made the framework out of was based on sort of a physiological timestamp that was their experience of being the person developing the scaffolding. My understanding, albeit limited, of thermodynamics is that physical systems are irreversible and they're not repeatable. And so the physical reality of a person at one moment of time is not the same as the next. They can use the same sounding and spelling words, but it's a fundamentally different meaning, a different framework. So I developed the idea of a kind of cognitive parallax that was important to start building in. And the entire scaffolding of the narrative was gone. And there was no way to get it back. And so I've had to work with that. And I always trace it back to the same kind of thing. I don't tell anybody that they have to accept the end of context or the non-reality of objectified language. I simply say that that's what followed from stipulating all the way back that personal experience had meaning independent of context. Once personal experience had meaning, and it was not context-based, and it was based on the person's experience in the moment, I could not see a way to have that be part of meaning, which it had to be for my mind to have one language system, and yet maintain. I could not be both immersed in meaning and apart from meaning at the same time. Maybe another person is smarter and stronger than I am, and more diligent and whatever they could do. So I could not perform that feat. It defeated me. I had to accept that the consequence of personal meaning was the end of collective context permanently. It was not only that it was destroyed, it had never been real in the first place. When I looked at the premise that meaning follows from understanding, but understanding was a collective shared thing, and then there's no words that belong to the set of things that could provide that understanding, generate the meaning, the entire thing vanished. And so if a person, all I can say for somebody else is nobody else has to accept that their personal experience independent of context is meaningful. All I can offer is if you want to treat yourself that way, that's okay. I won't treat you that way. I will not treat other human beings as if they're meaningless just because I don't have a context for them. But that's an individual liberties thing. But so the consequence of this whole thing has been complete destruction of objective language and a need to develop an approach to language that is perspective-based, much more intentional. And then, of course, I have to work out the relationship between my personal meaning and narrative consciousness. And then working that out has become the foundation of my continued efforts at aphasic recovery as a synesthetic autistic person. So that is the end of context, and I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.